Hey, and welcome to The Art and Science of AI, a podcast about the science of how AI works and the art of using AI to reimagine your life, business, and society. I'm Nikhil, one of your hosts. I'm an AI product manager, and I love talking about AI.
I'm Piyush, your other host, and I also love talking about AI. And I'm very, very excited today because we have a special guest joining our podcast today, our very first guest. And there are many reasons why this is a special episode, not the least because Rukma is an amazing, amazing person and very, very impressive at what she does. She's a AI marketing manager at Google, but also because Nikhil and Rukma are my best friends. They're actually like family at this point. Nikhil and Rukma are married to each other. And so we're very, very excited about that. And Rukma, thank you so much for joining our podcast and being our first guest. Um, what Nikhil and I want to learn from you today is how you, as a marketer, use AI in your daily life. What are some of the tools that you use? So yeah, I would love to learn because we do this. Before this, I talked a little bit about how I use AI in my sales job. So I think that's always very insightful to learn how different people are using AIs, specifically LLMs, in their job role. So please tell us a little bit about that. But before you jump into that, it's going to be a little weird for you to do this for Nikhil and I, because we obviously know who you are and what your background is. But if you don't mind sharing just your brief background journey and how you came to be marketing manager at Google.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to chat around AI with the both of you. I was there when you recorded your first podcast, and it was just so exciting to watch that conversation and to see this podcast take off from that has been really awesome. So, like you mentioned, I am an AI PMM at Google Cloud right now. I focus on Google Cloud's AI technology specifically for developers. So this includes products like Vertex AI, like Google Cloud AI Studio, like Gemini API, and a whole set of kind of open source models and frameworks and things that Google is developing specifically to help developers. Before this, I was working at Chrome OS, where I was focused on marketing for Chrome OS Enterprise, specifically telling kind of the story of the benefits of things like cybersecurity, management, all of that. Previous to that, I was at Square, and I started actually my career at Microsoft as a product marketer for cybersecurity incubations. There's a part of me that still loves cybersecurity, and I'm hoping to return to it, maybe the intersection of security and AI at some point in time. But in my latest role, I have been lucky enough to like really get to see some extremely cool products and use cases that one can build with AI, and also get to try some of them, to apply it in my marketing job and really play around with like the prompts and kind of like push everything to see the limits of how much can this really help me, where does it break down, how do I fix it, those kinds of things. So super excited to have this chat with you today.
And you
Great.
also have some experience with AI prior to your professional experience, right? Back when you were a student. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, that is true. So actually, my experience with AI does start when I was in college. I worked as someone who labeled data sets essentially for a large machine learning model. This was specifically in the realm of the digital humanities, and my advisor was the primary investigator on a project that was trying to use computational methods to analyze medieval manuscripts. So when it comes to an area that's like so kind of specific, you need people who have some subject matter expertise to do data labeling. So actually, I spent 2 summers doing data labeling for medieval manuscripts and could talk for a couple of podcast episodes at least about that. But today we'll focus on AI.
Very cool.
Sounds great. I'm very excited. Let's jump into it. Nikhil and I both would love to learn from you how you, as a marketer, use AI in your daily life on your job, and like what are the different tools you've come across that you like using, and yeah, just help us understand how you use AI in the world of marketing.
AI, since these tools, I would say, were really launched in a big way on the market just kind of playing around with ways that it can improve my workflow. So I'd be happy to sort of jump a little bit into that. But maybe before we start, we can talk a little bit about what kinds of different skills or capabilities even fall under marketing, because I think a lot of these pieces many people with many kinds of jobs would find use for, and it's not just someone who has like an official title of marketing.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one because I was also wondering how does what is product marketing exactly? Maybe you can start there, and how is that different from general marketing?
That's a good question, and I'm laughing a little because product marketing is defined just extremely differently by different companies. Even within companies, different teams, different kind of products will have different needs at any given point in time, and so product marketing kind of morphs to fit what is needed at any given point in time. But I would say the headline that I like to think about product marketing as is product marketing owns the story of the product and fitting that story or bringing that story to the right audiences. So that's kind of like how I think about it. I'm not sure if that makes sense, that resonates with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that does resonate with me. Can you maybe give me an example? So, what would that mean in the context of any of the products that you have worked on before? Like, help me understand what the story was and how you guys found the story and how you brought it alive.
Yeah, so I'll use the example of Chrome OS where I used to work until just about half a year ago. So Chrome OS for Enterprise is a whole set of products. It's a console that makes it easy and simple for IT managers to manage things like access, security, etc. All of these pieces that if you're running a company, you need to be able to manage for your employees. So what is the story there? Honestly, the answer to that is not so simple. Like that, even just finding out, hey, what is the story of this product can be quite interesting. And I actually have a framework I use, which comes from root cause analysis called the 5 Why framework, where when I'm having an interview with a product manager or an engineer who has built something, I will kind of keep asking why or trying to get to the root cause until we come up with a very human benefit. So it saves you time and helps you get home to your children or your priorities as a very human benefit. I made this setting do this thing 20 seconds more quickly and reduced lag time is not so easy to quickly understand that, hey, this is what the actual benefit is.
Right.
It's interesting actually that you mentioned this because I programmed one of the custom GPT options or gems as we've seen it internally at Google and was announced at I/O, which are basically like custom versions of Gemini that can help you to do this. I programmed one to anytime I say, hey, help me create messaging for insert X product. It keeps asking me why that matters or why that matters to the audience until it feels good about this is like a human benefit, and that is pre-programmed in my system instruction. So I told it, hey, don't stop asking the user why that matters until you get to...
That is very smart. Like, I think this is the first time, Nikhil, have you heard of this type of a use case before where, like, most of the times when we've discussed interactions with GPT or Gemini, it's the user asking the LLM. Rukma, what you've done is you flipped it on its head. Like you're making the LLMs ask you questions. That's very
Yeah,
interesting,
for
very
sure.
innovative
I
approach.
think because a lot of the times when you interact with AI, it starts giving you answers before fully understanding what it is that you're trying to do or what you want. And often I find that I have to stop it and say, hey, don't go further. Let's clarify this first. But I think this is a really interesting approach where you can ask the AI to know that, hey, you need to first ask questions to clarify before doing anything. And yeah, would love to learn more about how you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean that's really, I mean that's very smart. I'm gonna do that. That's amazing.
So it's funny because we've hit on somewhat of a soapbox topic for me. I'm always telling people, whoever talks to me about LLMs, that getting the LLM to ask you questions is just an infinitely useful thing. Because when we were in business school, I don't know if you did this at your business school, Piyush, but we had this communications class where they taught us about this Johari window, where there's information about yourself that you know, information about you that the other person knows, information the other person has that you don't know, information that both of you kind of don't know, or kind of, I think in a less communications oriented context, I think in the data science world, it's sometimes called as unknown unknowns. So I think interacting with LLMs, because it's such a new world, there's a lot of unknown unknowns. Like, you don't know what context you need to give it, really. It doesn't always know what to ask you. So I think making that unknown piece very explicit, that hey, keep asking your user questions until you get like an understanding of this A, B, C, D, E, F, G thing, is super helpful. Yeah,
This is really
this
interesting. So I've just put this up on the screen of a Johari window. It's a 2 by 2 matrix. On one axis, it says known to others and not known to others. On the other axis is known to self and not known to self. And then the thing that everyone knows is called the arena. The thing that you know, but other people don't know is called the facade. The thing that other people know that you don't know is called your blind spot. And the thing that neither of you know is called the unknown.
Right. That's a very interesting framework. One of my favorite things in this podcast is like learning about these concepts, these frameworks. It's this Mendel model. So, Rukma, so how do you use so my understanding is you try to ask a lot of the questions to the LLMs, and the reverse as well. You get the LLMs to ask you a lot of questions to uncover the fourth box, the unknown unknowns, because by definition, these are unknown unknowns, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's a certain amount that I know I need to tell the LLM, which in
Mm-hmm.
this, like, example would be the facade. So I know I have this info, I need to tell it to the LLM. So this is things like adding context by linking a doc or a PDF, giving it some links, telling it to search the web. These are all ways to give it that info. Um, there's stuff that the LLM is assuming that you want it to do that you don't know about. That's the blind spot. And then
Right.
there's stuff that the LLM doesn't know it needs to know, and you don't know you need to provide. And that's kind of this like fourth unknown box. And by giving it instead what I'm calling more like standards of understanding, or like a very clear, like I need you to know A, B, and C before you even attempt an answer in the system instructions. We're basically like trying to shorten that. I don't think it's ever possible to make that unknown window like negative or zero, but just trying to close that gap as much as possible.
Wow,
And I
this is
think
interesting. Go ahead.
most like conversations people have with LLMs, like you start in the arena, which is things
Hmm.
that both of you know, and your goal often is to fill in your blind spot. You're like, hey, there's something I don't know, and I want this language model to tell me this thing. But the thing is, like, the blind spot cannot actually be revealed until the facade also comes out. Like the things that you know that the LLM doesn't know, that it needs to know, some context about you. If it doesn't have that, it's not going to be able to like help you fill in your blind spot very well. So I think the idea is that to expand, you need to go in both directions. For
Yeah.
starting from the thing that everyone knows, both of you need to be sharing information and context with each other for the conversation to expand to new knowledge. And I think
Well,
that's something people
this
often
is very
miss.
interesting, Nikhil. I was reflecting back to our conversation we had when we were talking about we did a series of episodes on from zero to hero of using LLMs, and we talked about lazy shot prompting, which is what I did, to zero shot to few shot, right? So if we use that same framework and then we try and marry that framework with this framework, I think lazy shot or zero shot would be arena where you assume certain things that the LLM knows and you know, and you just send the prompt. Whereas I guess the facade would be you providing some examples in your prompt. So you're like,
Yeah.
hey, LLM, here are some examples of how would you. And then Rukma, I think what you're helping me understand is just going one level beyond what we learned in like the few short examples is, oh no, you have to have a back and forth with the LLMs to figure out what your blind spot is. And the way you can do that by getting the LLMs to ask you questions. So I feel like, Nikhil, this could also be like like just another tool in our arsenal to better our prompts.
Okay.
So yeah, I was saying that this is just another tool in our arsenal, and this tool is basically another way of enhancing our prompt. This is very cool, Rukma. This is amazing. So sorry. So we Nikhil and I have a habit of like digressing here and there, but I want to bring us back. So you were explaining how the job of a product marketing manager is to like come up with the human story behind the product, right? And that's not always very easy. There's some art and science to it. So one of the ways you use AIs in your job to come up with this story is to get the LLM to ask you a lot of the questions to figure out more about the product and such. So yeah, let's go ahead. I mean, that's very, very insightful, this way of using the LLMs.
Yeah, I mean, I also digressed because getting an LLM to ask you questions, I think, is such an easy thing to do and like really, really helps. But yeah, so going back to kind of how I think about my role, so there's several different parts of telling the product story and bringing it to audiences is first you have to understand who your audience is, what do they care about, right? Otherwise, like you're taking it to the wrong audience. You have to understand kind of what your product is and like you as a product marketer, and I think this is true for marketers across the board, like whatever product it is you're marketing, you actually do need to understand all of those technical details and things like why like latency going down or reliability going up is actually a good thing. And then I would say like the third kind of big piece of it is that you really need to have like a pretty good like strategic sense of which channels to use, how to allocate budget, how do we take this fairly amorphous sounding goal, like we want people to love our product and buy it, and make it like really real with things like, you know, all of the different kind of media that's available to you. So the way I described it, I think, is it's already obvious. Like a lot of this is applicable to anyone who wants to like build something for other people almost. Like I know that's a very broad definition, but I purposely said it that way because like you and Nikhil are building this amazing podcast. You're like providing all of this information to people, and you're hoping to reach the right people who would be helped by that. And to me, that's like great. That's like a traditional marketing problem. Like I could take that and kind of like work with that. So I would say these are all like kind of the different pieces of my job. And I have found help from AI in nearly every piece, from research and competitive analysis to positioning. I just talked to you about how it like kind of helps me do like messaging and like really getting to storytelling, to like channel allocations, to analysis of which channel is working well, what's going wrong, just kind of every little piece of it. And Piyush, you and I have actually even shared some best practices on especially that research piece of it, which is an important component to like, I think both our jobs where we really need to understand, you know, for you, like specific people you're selling to, and for me, maybe more like a persona or a specific type of person I'm selling to.
Yeah, that's very cool. I really like the way you broke down your jobs. You made it sound very easy, but it also sounds very, very difficult. So I'm curious, how do you use, like, have you started using AI in all of these different facets of your job, and have LLMs changed your jobs, the way you approach your job, and like, how do you use it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it has like completely transformed how I think about my job. Before I dive into the details, let me just talk about like two ways I think it's transformed my job. So I think earlier I was very much an individual contributor, right? I was like, yeah, I know how to create excellent messaging and I know how to create really strategic like channel plans. Now my job is much more about how do I coach this LLM in the most effective way to do that for me. So it's almost become like my role is much more like figuring out like oh, what would be the right process here? What would be the right way to set up a team of LLMs where I have like a creator LLM and an evaluation LLM and whatever, like what would that team architecture be? So in a way, even though I'm not a people manager at Google, I almost feel like my job is becoming more people manager, and only instead of people, I'm managing like little bots of the different LLMs.
That is interesting. I've never ever heard anyone use that phrasing before, but it makes so much sense. Coaching the LLMs, and you're treating the LLMs as your reportees. Yeah, that is so interesting to me. Wow. So how do you go about doing that?
So just a small divergence here, I'll just quickly say. I have noticed, and I don't know if this is replicable, but I have very much noticed that if I give it like good feedback, if I'm like, hey, this is going great, like, can you do X or Y? It tends to be much more excited to work with me. And I think part of the reason that is because, and I know this from listening to your podcast, is essentially what it's doing is predicting the next word, right? And I think just in its historic data sets, it has this correlation baked in where if someone's saying you're doing a great job, it's more likely to like produce something that's like more interesting related to what it was talking about. But anyway, that's a
Oh,
slight
that is so
divergence.
interesting to me. Wow, now I'm thinking this could very well be like the third episode in our series of zero to hero prompting, right? Like this is an amazing insight. The fact that the LLM produces a better output if you were to give it feedback on like, hey, you're doing well, like, or you're coaching it. That's amazing. Yeah, that's what does it hurt? It's just adding another line after your prompt, right? It's just good job. That was good. And if it produces a better output, then that's great.
I
So do
also
you,
think, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
I was just thinking that ethically, like thinking about our children, your daughter Piyush, like when she grows up, so much of their interaction is going to be with LLMs and ours too, like LLMs, AIs, and just the like human ethics of like, I would never tell a human being like, hey, this is totally wrong, go do it again, right? I would say, great start, like let's think about it again. So I also think there's like some level of like ethics that comes into it, and especially when I think about like how would I teach any future child like how to interact with things like Alexa and all of these assistants and Google Assistant and stuff. So for me, it's also just a matter of like I don't want to get into the habit of sounding offhand or rude because it's just like what if I do that to a human by mistake?
Actually, that is also another very insightful perspective. I didn't think about it like that, but now that you have mentioned it, you are right. I mean, my 2-year-old has started to use, like, she understand us interacting with Alexas and Google. And now I'm thinking it's not a good thing for them to think that that's how the real world works, that you just ask Google, hey, what is the temperature? And not use please or thank you in your reply. Because in her mind, it's like, okay, this is what normal looks like. You just order something and you get a response, and that's it. There's no kindness involved, there's no gratitude involved. But you're talking about that not just in the context of Alexa, but also these LLMs. But in this case, the LLMs actually respond better. Yeah, I mean, we can digress into this for much longer, but this is such an insightful perspective. Is just how do we talk to these entities that we know not to be real, but our interaction with these entities influence our children and what impact it has on them. Anyways, like I said, we can go into this rabbit hole for a long time, but that is a very, very insightful perspective.
Nikhil, I interrupted you. You were saying something?
Oh, I was just asking you, like, if you have specific AI personas that you're making that help you with various tasks and you coach each one of them to do something different. What does this workflow look like for you?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the team architecture or team design piece I was mentioning. So one kind of architecture that's been working really well for me recently is a content creator kind of agent or bot or what have you, and a content evaluator agent or bot or what have you. And with a little bit of coding, which I think there are low code ways enough that I could also do this. I could actually just create agents and chain them together. I haven't at the moment because my workflow is working okay, just using specific gems on Gemini or custom GPTs. So with the content creation piece of it, There's I use system instructions to program a bot. Yeah, so I have a content creation bot and kind of a content evaluation bot. So in my role as a marketer, after kind of I've done all the research, we figured out the positioning, then the time comes to really kind of like bring that positioning to life, right? So you have to create all of this like different content. Podcasts, obviously, something you guys have like a lot of expertise in, but obviously things like ads, you have graphics, booth copy for events, and email. Like marketing is everywhere. All forms of content can be marketing.
Can you maybe pick one example and
Yeah.
walk through the flow that you have?
Yeah, sure. So the content creation kind of bot that I created recently was specifically for events. So when we have events and we have people go and speak at them, we need to submit things like a title, an abstract, a little piece of like an email blurb where you're inviting people to come watch. You would sometimes have like short teaser videos, like speaker highlights, all of this kind of different stuff. So I created, I just uncreatively call it my event content creation bot. So I created one and programmed it with system instructions to basically produce this content. And the way it's set up is I like to think about it, at least this has been working well for me in the past in terms of identity, interaction rules, and tone. So identity is I tell it what it is or who it is. So I'm like, you're an event marketing expert with X years of experience in selling B2B enterprise technology. You have, if I wanted to have specific expertise in a certain audience or know something about a certain technology, I'll tell it. I'll be like, you're an expert in specifically, for example, Kubernetes or whatever it is. So I actually recently published an artifact on reforge.com. For those of you who might have memberships to Reforge, you can take a look there. But I just wanted to show that this is sort of how I use it. So like I mentioned, so step one is identity. So I told it you're an expert event content creator with 20 years of experience designing content for engaging trade shows and conferences, etc. Then we go into what you see here, which is interaction rules. So as you see, literally the first thing I told it was ask the user for any information you need to create your content most effectively. So just like blanket statement of make sure you do that. And then I go into those like standards of understanding that we were talking about. So I was like, at the minimum, I need you to make sure that you understand the target audience, event goals, and how is it being measured? What are the KPIs here? I'm like, make sure you understand both business and marketing goals as well as competitive presence from any other companies. So what this does, and this I've noticed when I actually start interacting with it, is sometimes this will lead to one set of questions and whatever answers I give, it feels good about and moves on and then generates the content. Sometimes it feels that these standards are not met. So it'll keep asking me follow-up questions like, okay, you said the target audience was, IT decision makers, but are you specifically talking about North America or is this like global? And it will keep asking me kind of like, more granular questions, which I may not have even considered telling it because my role is global. So I don't actually think about regions, honestly, when I'm designing stuff. And the fact that it thought of that and asked me was pretty great for me.
That would be an example of uncovering your unknown unknowns, or
exactly.
Yeah. That's amazing. Can I ask one question? This is for both Nikhil and Rukma. I've often seen people give an identity to the LLM. Why does that make a difference? I don't believe, Nikhil, we have talked about this before. Like, why does giving an identity to the LLM?
It just helps, as far as I understand, contextualize the way in which it's responding to you. So the LLM is trained with large amounts of data, right? And
Yeah.
it has it's large amounts of text from different contexts. And if you tell it that you are an expert event creator, like in this case, it will probably use the type of language that is more suitable to that. Based on its training data, it understands what type of language, what event creators typically talk about, what their main concerns are, what topics they need to address and how they would talk about them. So you could just ask this same question, right? You could say something like, "Hey, tell me about um, San Mateo. I live in San Mateo." And this is a pretty vague question, but if you say, "Hey, imagine you're a real estate agent and tell me about San Mateo,"
Hmm.
versus imagine
Right.
you're a geologist and tell
Right.
me about San Mateo, imagine you're an investor and tell me about San Mateo, those would give very different kinds of answers.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's a good example.
It makes me wonder though that maybe with the level of context I already give this, that this is maybe not a great use case for that identity piece of it. I've never really A/B tested this. Yeah, that would be interesting. Have you A/B tested this ever, Nikhil or Piyush, giving it identity versus not?
So I have been using what I coined a term called lazy shot prompting, which is like not even zero shot. It's like, hey, make this email sound good. Like that's how ridiculous my prompting has been. So
I think the more specific your prompt is, the less important the identity thing becomes. Because if I ask a vague question like, tell me about San Mateo or tell me about Silicon Valley, that's pretty vague and you could approach it in different ways. But if your question already has so much detail that you are providing a target audience, event goals, competitive presence, and then detailing exactly what kind of response you want, I think at that point, the identity is less impactful and maybe you don't need it. But I think it's super helpful in cases where you may not be specifying as much detail. Like often I might be like brainstorming some startup ideas or like app ideas that I'm building, and then I give the AI an identity and I tell it that, hey, here's the role you have to play, so that then I don't have to give so much detail every time I ask specific questions.
that
Yeah,
makes
that was
sense.
kind of my suspicion as well, that maybe it's not so helpful given I already give it all of this info.
So
But moving
Rukma,
on,
this
sorry.
sorry to interrupt you. This is what you call uh, content creator bot. When you say the word bot, do you mean a custom GPT or a gem? Is that the same thing
Yes,
as a bot?
that's exactly what I'm talking about. I created this particular one in Google AI Studio, where you can
Hmm.
also create kind of these custom prompts. Part of the reason for that, honestly, is that Google AI Studio is a product I market. So I like to use the products I market and like really understand what the experience is. And, you know, I have to say Google AI Studio is pretty great and I can recommend it. You can, do things like play around with temperature, which obviously like changes the confidence interval for the next word prediction, all of those things. So, um, there are different tools really, I think, to create these, and I am fairly tool agnostic. Model wise, I think I do like Gemini. I think maybe part of it is because I use it so much, but that's kind of one of my favorite models, and Claude is the other one I use a lot.
Actually, those are two of my favorites as well. The Gemini Advanced one because I have it for free. I don't have to pay the $20 because we as Google employees get it for free, and the Cloud 3 Opus from Anthropic. That one's also really good.
Yeah,
So,
Claude I really like.
one other question I had is you said that you have these two bots, a content creator bot and a content evaluator bot. How do these bots talk to each
Wait,
other?
can we finish this first and then go to
Yeah.
the evaluator? Let's just go through the content creator bot.
Sure.
So you talked about identity, interaction, and then you have
So
something called tone after that.
yeah, and I'll point one more thing out in interaction here. I say once you have this info, summarize it and check with the user that you've understood it correctly. So this is kind of my very last guardrail to make sure that that it really does understand like what it's being asked to do. Because what I've noticed is when my LLM or my AI really understands the task, almost within the first answer it gives me, I'm like, yeah, this is an excellent answer. So the
Hmm.
struggle really is just getting it to understand, like, hey, this is what I'm actually doing. And then I'm like, yeah, if I say proceed, go ahead and generate it. The tone piece of it, I think, is really only very relevant for something like this, where it's like marketing content and I want it to be in like a certain brand voice or a certain tone. I don't think tone is extremely relevant if you're just like, using it as an internal thought partner or anything like that. But since I do want this to be something I use externally, I give it some info about appeal to your audience, keep your tone professional but informal. With a custom GPT slash gem that you program to answer to like emails and things, tone can also be useful because then you can say stuff like, hey, keep it peer to peer at a tech company so that it doesn't generate these like kind of overly formal, dear sir, blah, 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 which we would never say to our colleagues. But yeah, this is available on Reforge. And also, if anyone listening wants to get a hold of this, feel free to reach out to me if you don't want to pay for a Reforge subscription to get
So
this.
in this particular instance, this content creator bot is specifically a content creator bot for an event marketing specialty, right?
Yes, but the only thing that would really need to change to make it a content creator bot for anything else is that identity part of it. The rest
And
of
can you
it,
give me some examples of other types of content creations? Like this is for events, right? What are some other contexts in the case of marketing?
email. So I think email is a big one because often you're creating an email funnel, right? So you want to have like 5 or 6 emails in a row. Actually, this is something you would probably know very well about, Piyush, because obviously sales also does outreach often. And every time you're talking to them, you want to like change it up a little bit. You have these decision trees, obviously, right? Like if someone responds to the first one, what's the second email they'll get versus if they don't respond to the first one, what's the email they'll get, etc. So email is like a really good one, again, because it's like it can be very processized and very clear kind of what
Right.
your output is. So I've used it for that a lot. I've also used it in the past for things like if I'm creating a pitch deck and I want to have like, some specific speaker notes, not necessarily what's on the slide. That I think humans might do a little bit better even now because a lot of it is about pulling out the highlights and using that human judgment to figure out what is a highlight versus not. Obviously, if you give it enough context, it can be as good as any human, but that might be like a little time consuming in and of itself. But speaker notes, it does a great job of. Like if I feed it my highlights and I'm like, hey, this is what's on the slide, create speaker notes for this, ask me all the questions. It does a great job of that. So I think those are 3 that I use it for quite a lot.
Okay, that's cool. That's very smart. I really like this use. So the other thing I was wondering, I asked earlier. So you said you have 2 bots, and I want you to explain what the content evaluator bot does. But you also said that they form a team. So how do they interact with each other? Like that part, I'm not very sure.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I put a little more effort into it, I could probably automate a way to get them to interact with each other. Right now, I just simply copy the output of one and paste it into the other. I'm like,
I
hey,
see. Okay. Okay.
And
that
we've
being
talked about
said,
this in the past. Like there are many like multi-agent workflow frameworks that you can use to easily
Yeah, there's one called
automate
Crew
this.
AI. I think they're very popular. They let you create multiple agents.
I think that's the one we talked about before. Crew and AutoGen are Python frameworks for if you want to code something like this, but there are also no-code platforms that you can use. There's Make is a popular one, Vector Shift, I think. There are a couple that are coming up. Zapier might let you do it. So there are also no-code platforms you can use to chain together multiple agents and have
But in
them.
your use case, Rukma, is there a lot of back and forth? If there isn't, then I imagine it's not too hard to just copy one prompt from the creator to the evaluator and be like, hey, evaluate this now.
I considered making a Zap for it. And honestly, like if I start producing content, like, at an even higher level of scale, I might end up wanting to zap it. But for right now, it's just one click, right? I'm just hitting Control C, Control V, and then we're done.
So tell us about the evaluator chatbot. What does that do, and what are its instructions?
Yeah, so I'm not going to screen share that one because that is still a little bit of a work in progress. But so far, the way I've set it up is I give it an identity as an expert at analysis. I tell it it's a marketing consultant. It's very good at auditing, analyzing, and suggesting improvements, basically. And then the interaction rules are that for any piece of content I paste in, it has to ask me what are the metrics and what is the call to action. So all marketing, I think, in some way is trying to inspire some form of action, right? Either it's like, you know, hit subscribe on Spotify, which might be something you guys are interested in, or it's like, come talk to my sales team, which is something I often want people to be doing. Sometimes it's like, go buy Axe body spray. It can be anything, but we're trying to inspire action. So, what is that action? I want the evaluator bot to be very clear about, and how we are measuring success, or what would be like a very successful way to do this, is something I want the evaluator bot to be very clear about. So it asks me questions until it has a good sense of, hey, this is the action and this is how we're evaluating it. Once it has that sense, what it does is like an analysis of how well will this piece of content make the audience or the reader or the viewer of that content take that action. And I ask it to rate it on a percentage scale. So it'll tell me like, yeah, with 90% confidence, this person will do this, or, with like 80% confidence, whatever it is. Then it has to suggest 3 things we could improve in the content to make that number go up. And then the second thing it provides is, based on the KPI you're measuring or your definition of success, this is what I project will happen versus not. And then again, it has to produce 3 things to kind of improve that. I think one thing to note here is that this is much more kind of experimental. Like, obviously, the estimates and things it comes up with are just kind of out of nowhere for the first few. But then what I can do is, after I go use the content at an event, I can come back and tell it, hey, remember you told me it was going to have like X on our metric? Here's what it actually had. Where do you think you went wrong, or what did you miss? And then it actually does a really good job evaluating what it itself got wrong. It'll be like, oh, like maybe I missed out on like X and Y. And then I can give it some more info. And I'm like, like, here are some other things that happened that could have caused this. And then it's like, yeah, okay, great. And then I tell it, okay, summarize everything you learned. So then I have that one single paragraph where it tells me like, here's everything I learned based on my prediction versus the actual number. And then I feed that back into system instructions. So I'll go back.
You weren't joking when you said that you coach them and you act as if you're the manager, and they're like, this is like literally everything that a manager would do, right? It's like, hey, where did you go wrong in this? Like trying to reflect. And yeah, I mean, you make a great manager because you're getting such a great, if you aren't already, this is amazing.
Very nice of you. I honestly do it purely because it like saves me time. But yeah, it works for me. It's fun.
Yeah, that's very smart. This is remarkable. I'm gonna start. This is just like, if there's one takeaway for me from this episode, there are many insightful things that you shared today, but one big takeaway would be that I'm gonna start acting more of a coach to the LLMs, and also be very mindful of the tone that I use, because you can get a better output. But this is, yeah, very, very insightful. So
what would be the first thing, like what would be like a change you make like on Monday or immediately next that would make you more of a coach?
I think this mindset shift would be the biggest change. Like right now, I think the approach that I take is, it's a tool, and then I'll just have to use this tool. But I'm going to start treating it more like it was a reportee of mine, and I'm the manager, and my job is to like get the best out of them and also help them develop, because that's what you're doing. Like in the last thing that you mentioned, you're like, all right, now reflect on what you think may have gone wrong, and then you're taking the learnings and you're trying to build them into the systems front, which is what you're hoping a reportee of yours will do, right? They will like learn from their mistakes and then hopefully like improve from that. So yeah, I think it's a mindset shift.
I would say this making it learn from its own thing is also helpful for like, I think pretty much any bot. Like when I first started with my content creators, they would give me some output and I'm like, no, this is not really on our voice, or the positioning is wrong, this, that. So then I would rewrite it myself and give it back and say, I rewrote it to say this, whatever X. Can you explain what are the differences between what you provided and what I gave? And then I would take that, whatever answer it gave, and put it back in system instructions.
Very interesting. Very cool.
On the topic of these multi-agent workflows, I just wanted to share one of the common frameworks that's been emerging in the programming world for how to set these up. This is from the LangChain blog, and LangChain is a popular framework for programming LLM applications. And they have a framework for multi-agent workflows, and here's how they think of it. So there's a user, which is you at the end of the day, and you first interact with a supervisor agent, and then the supervisor agent routes your query to several possible other agents. So in this case, your supervisor agent could be like a marketing manager, and these agents could be an email writing agent, could be a social media content writing agent, it could be a campaign writing agent or like an evaluator agent, and you only interact with the supervisor agent, and then the supervisor agent coordinates all the other agents' interaction. So it automates this flow that Rukma was describing, that she built for herself, of a writer agent and an evaluator agent. And yeah, it's really interesting. So people are trying to like productionize these multi-agent workflows into an automated system like this. And it's hard to specify what are the conditions when you stop the flow, because pretty much every time you go through the loop, like the evaluator agent will never say this is perfect, because you've programmed it to be like, hey, you need to find, wait, what's wrong with this. So then that's where usually the supervisor agent is where you give some logic that, okay, like maybe you can stop here, or you say after a certain number of iterations, just to avoid running into like an infinite loop, you stop. But that part actually is the hardest to automate. So Rukma, in her case, is playing the role of the supervisor.
I was
She's
just going to say
doing
that.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like Rukma is playing the role of the supervisor, and it's kind of scary to me that this blog on LangChain puts the user above the supervisor, and the supervisor is supposed to be automated. Like, this is scary to me. This goes back to a
Yeah.
conversation that Nikhil and I had, is like, at what point do our jobs become redundant? But anyways, we won't go there. Rukma, I'm curious. Nikhil used the word that this helps you productize. Like, have you seen your productivity improve after using these LLMs in your
Oh,
workflow?
by a huge amount. Like, honestly, currently, at my job, I am in charge of executing and running um, nearly 80 events, big and small, over the year.
Eight
Uh,
zero?
80, yes.
Wow.
And I don't think I could do it without my
Yeah, that sounds
LLMs.
intense.
So,
Oh.
like 100% super much more like productivity for sure. And also, there's definitely my colleagues at work, who have similar roles, have reached out to me, and I think it's like helped them. So yeah, I think my view on AI and LLM specifically is like nothing's going to take away that art piece that you guys have in the art and science of AI from humans. Like my judgment, my like business intuition, my sense of like where budget is going to work best is always going to be required. But all of the pieces of like analysis, creation, evaluation, execution, that the AI can do, it does very well, does fast, it does not get tired, it doesn't have limited kind of brain power like I do. So I love using it. It's like basically, to me, it's like having a constant thought partner or consultant by my side while I'm working, and I can just go there and be like, hey, can you do this? Can you do that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I keep going back to thinking like there is this one famous saying that's applied to almost all types of jobs, that your job will not be taken by AI, but your job will be taken by someone using AI, and you can replace your job with like marketing or sales or this and that. But I think the examples that you use are such a perfect example for that particular saying, right? Because imagine someone in your role who's not using these LLMs versus you who are using these LLMs to coach them to get so much productivity out of it, and also to frankly produce better work even, right? Like the unknown unknowns, like there's only so much you can do from your own thinking, but when you have a thought partner as you described, you're much more likely to not just uncover your blind spots, but your unknown unknowns. Another amazing framework that I learned today. I'm curious, Rukma, so these two, like all of these workflows that you explained, you're using LLMs or custom GPTs. Are there any other tools that you use, AI tools in your job, in your workflows?
Yeah, so I actually recently found one that I'm very excited to talk about. I actually haven't even mentioned this to Nikhil yet, but it's called Flowwith, so Flowith. And what it does, fascinatingly, is that it's just like any normal conversation, and it supports a bunch of different models. So you can pick which specific model you want to converse with. But what it does is it breaks up your conversation into a graphical kind of user interface. So it'll show, like, suppose you ask it a question, it'll be like, node one, went and did this research and this is what it said. Then it'll split into two nodes. It'll be like, based on that research, I went further down the path of A and B thing. Then it'll go into like, okay, within B thing, I went further. And so it almost maps this like network of thought. And it makes, like, I'm not saying that the graphical mapping is exactly what the neural network is doing, right? Because this is like the basic thing Nikhil explained in your first podcast is that, hey, that machine learning is not human explainable. We can't really
Right.
understand what's going on there. But it somehow uses a concept or a metaphor, if you will, that makes it easier for me to understand, hey, this is what the AI is actually doing. And then it also, I think by now it's probably clear to everyone listening that I am very into processes and like setting up these detailed instructions and stuff. So for me, I love being able to see like, okay, here's this node versus that node. And then you can actually go click on each specific node. So suppose you're like, hey, you know, during your process you were doing everything correctly, you did step A, step B, step C, but in step D actually you went wrong. You can go up there and tell it like, hey, this is wrong, change it to something else, and come up with like a better kind of final answer. So I have been having a lot of fun with this, especially for brainstorming kind of stuff, because it just creates this like mind map and you can play with it and it's fun and it's like very easy to understand. Oh, great, Nikhil found it.
I just looked this up and this looks really cool. So here's the first example it gives you. It says research the top most profitable US tech companies, and then it gives you a list of the companies, and then it breaks it down into five different nodes, like one for each company, and you can choose whether you want to continue going down the a single node, like so the companies are Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook. I could click on one of them and follow that line of reasoning and say I want to
Right.
dig into that. Or you can connect some or all of them and ask it to do a task like generate a chart using all of this data. So this, I've never seen this before. This looks really cool. I
Yeah, it does.
definitely want to play with
Because
it
so
more.
far, all the interactions that you have are all in one window. So it's like just one train of thought, and it sounds like or it looks like in this thing, you can have multiple train of thoughts visualize at the same time, and you can, like, if I'm
It's
sticking
like
with
a
the,
mind map.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This is very cool. Flow
What
with.
what have you used this for, Rukma? Any interesting example you can share?
So my non-day job is that I am a creative writing enthusiast. And I have recently been using it to kind of brainstorm what happens next in this story I'm writing. It's based on the Indian epic, the Mahabharata. I think I have mentioned this to you as well at some point, Piyush, but yeah, I'm writing this novel, and I every time I'll write a new chapter and it'll be like, okay, this happened, that happened. Then I go to flow with and I'll say, okay, this happened, that happened. And then it's like, here are 20 different notes for what could actually happen next. And I don't necessarily listen to those notes, but it's just like a fun way to see like all the different like threads my characters could take, the arcs that could happen, the locations they could go to, the magic they can interact with. So I've just been having fun with it for
That
my
actually sounds really
non-day job.
cool. So you're like, okay, I got to a certain point in my story and I'm not sure which direction to go, and this tool can map out 10 different directions you could go in, but you're like, I'm not sure which of these 10 directions to pick. You can expand each of the nodes, and for each of the 10 directions, go further and further, and then based on the end state, you can choose which end state do I like, and then go down that node. That sounds really powerful and really cool. Because actually, that's one of the main problems I have with LLMs. The linear chat experience right now is that often it goes too quickly into picking a solution and talking about that. But in the early stages, I just want to explore what are all the
Yeah.
different things, and then I want to go down each of those different options to a deeper level to understand what choice I should make. So this sounds amazing. I can't wait to try it out.
Yeah, no, I would strongly recommend it. I mean, I almost never, my creative process is such that I almost never just like pick one node and follow it, but it's more like a way of like sparking ideas and
Hmm.
simulate. It honestly is like a way to simulate different worlds or like different chains of thought where you're like, hey, if I went down this train, here's where I'd go. If I went down this other train, here's where I'd go. Another thing I used it for recently was just a brainstorm exercise at work as well. I think it's very good for these like
Mhm.
creative, open, like brainstorming exercises.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of team activities have people putting sticky notes where they do brainstormings. I can almost
Right.
envision using something like this by yourself as like one of those team meetings when again you have like five different people thinking about five different spread threads and all different ideas. It's cool recommendations. I'll
All right,
try it out.
Rukma, is there anything else you want to plug before we end this episode?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say thank you. This was a really fun episode. I loved geeking out about on my specific prompting. And then, if anyone listening is interested, I will be speaking in SF at the AI for Marketers Summit. Use AI in my workflow, as well as the Developer Marketing Summit. And you can find all of this information on my LinkedIn, which is just my name, Rukma. And I look forward to connecting with anyone who wants to talk about AI with me.
Rukma, I have a
Very
suggestion
cool.
you can put as your tagline on LinkedIn, the AI coach. Because again, like I said, I loved it. Like the way you use AI, I think that's a big mindset shift that's happened already. I'm gonna try and coach the AI as opposed to talk to it or discuss it.
Really worried it like people should not assume like I am a coach and I can like help
Yeah,
them
true,
out.
true, true.
But
Yeah.
I love that idea.
Thank you so much, Rukma. Yeah, and then Nikhil, we should link Rukma's LinkedIn into our description so people can find her
Yeah,
there.
of course. And thank you also to our listeners. If you're with us, connect with Rukma if you want to learn more about what she talked about. Let us know what you thought about this episode. If you liked it, leave us a rating or review. As always, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Right,
All right, guys.
right.
See ya.